everyone. Uh, Welcome to what's going to be the last session of this semester for SBS 335 Digital Ethnographies. Uh, Today, what I would like to share is my notes on the article that I have assigned this week on online religion, particularly in the case of Nigeria, which is, I hope you will agree with me, a most fascinating case in terms of what's going on out there on the internet. So let's get on with my notes. I have to share with you one thing. I read this article and I selected this article because it really brings some relevant information as to what's going on in Nigeria in terms of religion on the internet. We could have chosen many other cases, but Nigeria is a particularly interesting country because, as you know, it's a country that has multiple Christian denominations and then a strong presence of Muslim population. So, in that sense, it really brings an interesting case. And then, in addition, it's a country that has been connected to the internet in ways that I haven't seen in other countries. So it's pretty remarkable. So let's explore some of this. But I have to tell you that I am also approaching this article with a little bit of a trepidation. If you look at the context and the author, you will see how the author is a religious person that works for a religious university, and that shouldn't be a disqualifier fact in and of itself. But then it really makes you be a little bit more attentive to how the argument is built. And so I'm going to build a counter argument to what he's saying, and that I don't agree with some of the analysis, and that is okay. That's part of what you're going to find in scholarly publications. But be aware that not everything that is published you have to be in agreement with. All right, so, and that is the case insofar as I'm concerned with this particular article. So the name of the author is Innocent Chiluba. Innocent Chiluba, who teaches for the Covenant University in Nigeria, which is a university that is associated with one of the main denominations, Christian denominations in the country. As I was explaining, Nigeria it's a really interesting country, complex, fascinating, with many positive and complex issues. There's plenty of ethnographies on what has been happening with the Delta region of the Niger River with the oil companies. And if you're not familiar with that, I will strongly encourage you to get to know a little bit more about this fascinating country. In the map that I'm showing you, it shows how the country is basically divided into two areas. One is the Muslim. In this map, it states that Sharia law applies there, but I have to warn you, not everything that has to do with Sharia law is that they're beheading people and stoning women. Um, it's more complicated than that. So again, if you have interest in the topic, we will need to dig a little deeper. But there's a divide in terms of religion, clear divide between the Christian and Muslim population. Um, what the article does is it explores the use of internet and in among the mostly the Christian um, community, and how the internet has been used by the Christian community in Niger, and that's why the case is quite an interesting. So what you have is the local church or churches and how they have used the online arena. And so one thing is when you have an established church that actually uses the internet as a tool, and the other thing that we're exploring and that I have fascination for is the extent to which you can actually have a religious experience in the realm of the digital. And that'll be the one thing that I'm after, that I'm more interested in. The article gives evidence that both things are happening. On the one hand, you have religions that are just using the internet as another platform to expand and present the doctrine and the beliefs and norms. And on the other hand, you have a clear sense that worship and and um, and religious life is actually now happening and moving into the realm of the internet, which will be a different phenomenon that I think is worth exploring. For example, the article proposes, and I was intrigued by the fact that some of the miracles that the community is experiencing as the core of their belief seem to be happening in the online sphere, which is quite fascinating. That'll be moving, having an online religion happening. So that's the interesting facet. The author also explores, I think, here somewhat through his religious perspective, how there's a fear among practitioners in churches that the online fellowship might be in direct competition with the physical fellowship, which is interesting. So when you have, I was listening this morning to what's going on with the retails that are brick and mortar stores, and they are seemingly losing in front of all the shopping that is happening online. And if you think of it, it's quite an unfair competition, because to have a brick and mortar building with people and salaries and all of that, that's the overhead is much stronger than the one that you might have on an online distribution system. Uh, no wonder Amazon is doing so well. And then something similar is going on with the churches in Africa and elsewhere. To what extent the online space is now competing with the actual real spaces. It seems as though what's going on right now is that there's a positive combination on both aspects, but it's a recent phenomenon, and I'm expecting to see things uh, that things will be changing gradually. Um, the other concern that churches have expressed is that the online realm, very much so like in the news, that you have fake news and real news, then you might have fake religions emerging, and and then the religions and the churches are concerned about people that might be susceptible to deception on their internet. So, anyways, that's in a nutshell what the article will be talking about. So, what's religion like in Nigeria? Well, as you can see, the presence of the Muslim religion in Nigeria is it's pretty solid. And I think I said Niger before, and we have to distinguish those two countries. Niger lays at the north of Nigeria, and Nigeria is the coast in the eastern western coast of Africa nation, different from Niger. So Nigeria has a little more than half of the population that is Muslim, and then the rest it's Christian denominations divided by Catholic, Protestant, other Christian denominations, and then other faiths. And that's but here's the point: is that 90% of the country seems to be involved in one or another religion. So this is a deeply religious country, non-secularized country. Um, some of the questions that the article is exploring and that are of importance for us is how are churches using cyberspace, and how effectively are they using it. The article has a sequence of 7 churches that are being analyzed, and I have actually posted on our website links to the different resources and elements of each of those 7 churches. So you can explore, I'm asking you to explore one or two of those churches for the problem solving exercise. Um, are these new expressions of faith on the internet generating new forms of practices in terms of religion? What is the promise that the internet presents to religion, and what are the challenges as the ones that we just mentioned before? And then the ultimate question for Christians will be, what is the future of the church in this technologically mediated communities of faith? Here's an example of how one of the churches in Nigeria is using the internet, and you can see how there's a practical combination with the actual duty of the church, that is professing the faith, and then you have the practical part in that you have all these areas for ads that are presented on the website. And I just found this to be an interesting combination of the practical and the not so practical ways of religion. Um, so the article goes on exploring the difference between online religion and religion online. To me, there's a clear difference there. An online religion is a religion that is taking place online, so that practitioners are virtually connected, not physically offline connected. There might be some offline connection, but most of what's going on is happening online. Whereas a religion that is online is a religion that is using the online platform to actually empower and enhance and expand its activities. Apparently, the author seems to fall on the realm of not seeing a deep distinction there. I think there's a deep distinction, and I'm actually fascinated by the fact that we might have in years to come religions that are solely um, virtual religions that are practiced and carried away in the digital realm, because I think there's all of the elements necessary for that. Then the article goes on to reviewing some of the practices, and this is perhaps the most valuable part of the article, if you ask me, and that the author explores how religions are using, to what extent, and with what tools, the different websites that are out there that they are creating. The one thing that seems to be a key characteristic of all websites that are explored is that the way things are presented in a way that it reinforces authority as opposed to enabling for a more horizontal um, exchange of ideas and sort of more of a dialogue. So there's for example very little in terms of online chats that would allow for people questioning and the tenets of the religion, of some of the practices of the religion, and in that sense that will be a challenge to authority that will be harder to tackle than in a physical context of a church, and certainly something that most religions will not want to deal with or are not wanting to deal with. So what the author says, we were expecting this from hierarchical churches like the Catholic Church, but we're also finding that to be the case for other Christian denominations, and I found that to be an unexpected and interesting development as to how the word is used by Christian denominations. Um, then, and the other moves into what seems to me, a troubling digression from what I was expecting from the article, and the author feels compelled to actually make a case against secularism. And I don't know if you remember, but secularism is a philosophical in origin perspective on religion that states that the more the society moves in the path of progress or gets more complex and more scientific, the less religion has a role to play. Because as reason takes over as the main source of authority, then religion loses its grip on authority. And this has been a clear tendency in European and Western nations, but obviously not the case in other nations. So that's a basic tenet of secularism, right? And then politically, secularism is expressed in the form that religion and the state, religion and politics should be separated, kept apart. And I would contend that also religion and science should be kept apart, like any scientist for that matter. We need to keep those views and perspectives separated. Um, he spends a good chunk of time explaining how religion comes from authors like Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, and he explains how, in a fairly good way, although quite incomplete and partial, but he explains how those three authors, Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, have made certain assertions about religion that he finds difficult to appreciate. And then he says, well, what would be an argument in opposition to secularism? And he says, well, let's take a look at the evidence. On the one hand, it's clear that lots and lots of people are still in advanced complex societies, like Nigeria is, not post-industrial, but advanced and complex. Um, Lots of people use the internet because it is accessible, it is cheaper, and it's complex. So you have a complex technology that is not driving people away from religion. And secondly, he sees that spirituality is actually transforming the digital realm. And we have kind of embraced this position that culture can actually change the way we use technology. And that's the argument he's proposing. So in principle, I have no objection to that. I do think that if you see how people are using the internet to approach religion, definitely it has had an impact on how the tools are used and modeled so that they can best serve the offline practices of religion, right? For example, religions you will be using blogs and news groups and forums and even engage in online ritual, which is again what moves this into the realm of having an online religion that I'm so fascinated with. But here's the thing, the big argument that he's proposing has to do with whether or not the fact that spirituality is moving into the realm of the digital, and and how the digital has been transformed by spirituality, that in a way contradicts this idea of secularism, that the more technologically advanced you have a society, the less religion it is. And I gave it to him that there's complex and technologically advanced societies that are not secular. But is that sufficient proof? Um, Religion is comprised, let's think of it for a moment, and I appreciate this definition from the author before I close the loop with this argument. Religion is comprised of morality, customs, values, and traditions, right? So how is this negating science or technology? Here's a caricature of sorts, right? And one that it's, in a way, I have to say, um, pretty much shows differences between science and faith. Science is fundamentally grounded on evidence, whereas faith is it's about whether or not you adhere to certain beliefs, right? If the evidence contradicts your initial ideas in science, then you're going to reject that as a bad idea. But if the evidence supports the idea that you have, then you have a theory that it's being created, and then that continues in a loop, and that's the idea of science. In religion, you have an idea that is a perception of the nature of things, and the evidence is going to have to bend to that idea. And if it is not bending to that idea, it's because we're not understanding that evidence, or because the evidence in a way it's imperfect, it's empirically imperfect, and hence it's just not it's just not enough to contradict the idea. So no matter what the evidence is, the idea is going to survive, and that's what we call it faith, right? Um, and those two realms are to be distinct and separated. But here's the argument that the author is proposing that I had so much trouble with, and it is that as people that are working on the internet are seeing that miracles happen, and they are telling us that they have ex- experienced miracles. For example, someone was going to the hospital with a swollen leg, it says, reads in the article, and then he connected to the internet to listen to a presentation, and then the leg got better and healed. So that is a miracle that happens because you're connected to the internet. And as people are claiming that the existence of those miracles, because the miracle presupposes the existence of a sensitive and responding supernatural being called God, then the miracles demonstrate the existence of God. Hence, the mistake of secularism. There's two things that I don't understand. First, what is this argument doing in this article? That it's about representing what's going on with religion on the internet, and secondly, the argument in and of itself, it's one that it's for me really difficult to understand in terms of its logic. So, because people say there are miracles, I fail to see how that is a miracle in and of itself, and how the miracle brings the presence of God in that particular moment. I can say that the fact that you're listening to me tonight is a miracle, or tomorrow, whenever you're listening to, but that doesn't make it a miracle, right? Not because I don't understand how this works. That means that it's been created by a supernatural power. And that's a matter of faith, not a matter of evidence. So I find this argument quite difficult to follow. And I quite don't understand why the author needs to get into this discussion on secularism. So I'm going to leave this behind and continue to read what he has been saying about how religion plays out on the internet in the case of Niger. So the internet, and this is an interesting, very interesting fact to follow, has enabled for the growth of these churches, and certainly for the growth of the Nigerian Pentecostal Christianity. So that's a fact that is worth exploring. So in this case, it seems like the internet has been utilized as a most effective tool for the growth of a movement, in this case of a faith. What is also interesting is that he's showing that there are events and elements of religion that are mostly happening on the internet. Hence, I think there's evidence to say that there's an emerging online religion that will be eventually independent from a physical local community. And that, to me, it's quite an interesting, worthwhile continue exploring phenomenon. And last but not least, the conclusion of the article states that what has happened in Nigeria is that the churches of Nigeria have spiritualized the internet. And if by that we understand that the spiritualism, the spiritual nature of the activities that people in Nigeria are conducting around religion on the internet are changing how the internet is used in Nigeria, by all means. I think that is exactly the same argument that we used to explore what was going on with communications and remittances in the case of the Filipino mothers that are in workers that are abroad, and then connecting with the families in very specific ways that were not the original intended ways for the use of the technology they're using. So absolutely, there's here a clear transformation, cultural transformation of the technology, so that the online life reflects the offline life of people. And in that sense, I think this is an impeccable argument. So except for the argument on secularization, that I definitely don't see the point or the logic of the argument, I think this is quite an interesting article to read and to use as a way to frame the exploration that I'm asking you to conduct this week with the different churches of Nigeria, and so that you can expand on your reflection on how religion is taking place, aided by the internet, by the digital realm, or even more interestingly, in the digital realm. All right, that's my presentation for today, and I guess I will see you